They said I should have been grateful when the HOA offered to beautify the empty stretch of land behind my house. They said it would raise property values, bring in new families, make our neighborhood shine. But what they didn't expect, was that the land they were so eager to build on wasn't my name, my deed, my soil. And when I realized what they'd done, it was already too late. 95 homes stood there, polished driveways and picket fences glinting under the sun, sitting proudly on land they'd stolen right out from under me. For months, I watched in silence as the construction crews came and went, their machines tearing through the earth I grew up walking on. The HOA board smiled in their expensive suits, boasting about progress, while I stood in the shadows, clutching the paperwork that could shatter their entire empire. I could have stopped them early on, but I didn't. I let them build every single house, every sidewalk, every mailbox, brick by brick until their pride reached its peak. Because I knew something they didn't. When you build on stolen ground, it doesn't matter how perfect your foundation looks. One signature, just one can bring it all crashing down. And when that moment came, I made sure they were all in the room to watch it happen. The question is, how far would you let someone go before you remind them what's yours? When I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, it felt like a dream wrapped in white fences and maple trees. The streets were quiet, lined with neat lawns and pastel houses that all seemed to glow in the evening sun. Kids rode their bikes in small circles, waving at passing cars, and the neighbors smiled like they'd been rehearsing for years. It was the kind of place that sold the illusion of peace, where everyone believed good manners could hide bad intentions. My wife and I had saved for years to buy that home. It wasn't the biggest one on the block, but it sat on a generous stretch of land that dipped into a small wooded patch behind the household oak trees, birds, and the steady hum of crickets in the summer. That land was my escape, my sanctuary. I mowed it myself, planted wildflowers by the fence, and built a small wooden bench where I'd sit on Sunday evenings, just listening to the wind. I remember thinking, this is where I'll grow old. This is where my kids will play. But dreams like that have a way of fading fast when people start believing they own more than they do. The HOA was quiet at first. They sent cheerful newsletters, held community picnics, and handed out Neighbor of the Month certificates. It all felt harmless until it didn't. I started noticing little things. Surveyor flags near the back edge of my property. Men in reflective vests pacing the fence line, talking in hushed voices. One morning, I walked outside to find a small wooden stake hammered into the ground where my wildflowers used to grow. It had a bright orange tag on it. Future Development Area. I thought it was a mistake, maybe for a utility check, but the feeling in my gut said otherwise. I brought it up at the next HOA meeting. A stuffy evening in the clubhouse filled with polite smiles and fake interest. The president, a man named Grant Hollister, assured me it was routine infrastructure review. His tone was calm, but his eyes were calculating. I wanted to believe him. I really did, because the alternative that they were planning something on my land felt impossible. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. The following week, I noticed new faces walking the neighborhood. Not residents, but contractors, engineers, men in hard hats pointing toward my yard. When I asked one what they were doing, he said, "Site prep for the new subdivision." I laughed, thinking he had the wrong lot, but he didn't. That night, I went through my deed, tracing the boundaries with a flashlight and a growing sense of dread. Every measurement, every line clear, as they proved that the land beyond my fence was mine. And yet, somehow, it was as if the HOA had decided that paper meant nothing. Within days, the letters started arriving. Community redevelopment proposal, zoning improvement notice, land integration agreement. All of them wrapped in polite language but carrying the same message. Give up your land for the good of the neighborhood. My neighbors didn't understand what was happening. They called it progress. They said it would make the community more complete. Some even congratulated me, assuming I was selling the land for a profit. But I wasn't. I wasn't selling anything. And that's when the whispers began, that I was holding up development, that I didn't care about the community. The HOA board smiled in public but tightened their grip behind closed doors. Every letter I ignored came with a new fee. Every meeting I skipped earned me a fine. The more I resisted, the more they tried to corner me, like a predator circling prey. They thought they could push me into submission, that they could wear me down with paperwork and fake kindness. But I didn't move. I watched. I listened. And in the silence between their threats, I started to see the cracks forming, the greed, the arrogance, the carelessness of people who thought they were untouchable. They wanted my land because they saw profit. I wanted to keep it because it was my home. What they didn't know, what they never stopped to consider, was that I was patient. And patience, in a place like Willow Creek, was the one weapon they couldn't defend against. So, I let them smile. I let them build their plans. And I waited for the moment they'd decross a line they couldn't come back from. It started small. The kind of small that most people would overlook. A letter here, a notice there. The HOA said they'd misplaced my payment for community maintenance, though I had the receipt in my hand. Then came a fine for excessive grass growth on a lawn that was trimmed 2 days before. At first, I thought it was a clerical mistake, something an email or a polite call could fix. But the tone of their responses said otherwise. "We'll review your case at the next board meeting," they wrote, again and again, each message colder than the last. They weren't making mistakes. They were sending a message. I stopped sleeping through the night. Every creak of the porch, every car door slamming outside, made me think of what they'd do next. My mailbox became a weapon, each envelope carrying another slice of control. Late fees, violation notices, mandatory landscaping corrections. My favorite oak tree, the one that shaded my bench out back, suddenly violated visibility guidelines. I didn't even know such a rule existed. They said it obstructed the view from the new model homes, the ones that hadn't even been approved for sale yet. When I refused to cut it down, the fines doubled, then tripled. One morning I woke to find a bright orange notice stapled to the trunk. Final warning. Removal required. It was surreal watching strangers in neon vests measure my tree as if it belonged to them. I tried reasoning with them, but the man just pointed toward the clubhouse and said, "Take it up with the board." The board, always hiding behind paperwork, never facing the people they hurt. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a growing pile of envelopes, each one heavier than the last. My wife tried to stay calm, reminding me to breathe, to keep my cool. But I could see the worry in her eyes. The HOA had power, and they loved using it. The harassment crept into every corner of our lives. I'd come home from work to find my trash cans mysteriously violating placement policy. My mailbox was painted over without warning. One day, someone even left a note taped to our door that read, "Non-compliance has consequences." No signature, no explanation. Just those words, printed in blocky black letters. That was when I realized they weren't just trying to take my land anymore. They wanted me gone. They wanted me out before I became a problem big enough to expose them. I started documenting everything, every letter, every photograph, every noise outside after midnight. If they wanted to play games, I'd keep score. But the true breaking point came when I saw the bulldozers return. I was sipping coffee that morning, half awake, when I heard the low rumble. At first, I thought they were just doing road work. Then I saw machines lined up along the edge of my property. Men with clipboards marking boundaries that didn't belong to them. They had construction tape strung up across my fence line, as if the land had already been claimed. I ran outside, papers in hand, shouting over the noise. "This is private property," I yelled. The foreman looked at me with a mix of annoyance and pity. "Not according to the HOA," he said. My stomach dropped. I demanded to see the paperwork, and he handed me a copy of a land integration agreement. My signature was on it, except it wasn't mine. That night, I sat at the dining table under the dim light, the forged document spread before me. My hands shook as I traced the fake signature. It was a near-perfect copy. Someone had gone to the trouble of imitating my handwriting, right down to the loop in my initials. My wife said we should call the police, but I knew better. The HOA had influence, friends in local offices, ties to the zoning board. If I went to the authorities without proof, I'd just look like another angry homeowner with a grudge. So, I waited. I filed a quiet report with the county recorder's office, attaching the real deed and a notarized affidavit. I didn't tell the HOA. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Within weeks, the construction began not just near my fence, but on my land. Cement track surveyors, piles of gravel, and metal posts sprouting from the ground like weeds. I could only watch as they dug into the soil I'd tended for years, ripping out my flowers, leveling the ground, cutting down the oak tree that had survived decades of storms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stop them. But instead, I stood there in silence, the taste of metal on my tongue, and I realized something important. They weren't building houses. They were building evidence. Every nail, every foundation poured without legal ownership would one day become proof of their arrogance. The neighbors started to notice too. Some whispered apologies when they passed me, but most stayed silent. The HOA had made me an example. To them, I was the man who refused to cooperate, the one who stood in the way of progress. I could feel their judgment like heat on my skin. Even the kids who used to wave now looked away. The community that once felt safe had turned into a stage, and I was the villain in their play. But the thing about pressure is that it doesn't just crush you, it sharpens you. I began studying everything: HOA bylaws, state property codes, zoning regulations. Night after night, I sat surrounded by folders, highlighters, and copies of old maps. I learned that the HOA had quietly reclassified parts of the community as a Phase 2 development zone, using a loophole in an old clause about unused adjoining land. That clause required the owner's consent. Mine, which they'd faked. Every document they filed, every permit they submitted, was built on that single lie. It was the thread I needed to pull. The more I uncovered, the more reckless they became. One evening, I found a man standing at the edge of my yard, taking photos. When I asked what he was doing, he smirked and said, "Just documenting known compliance." I reported it, but the HOA called it routine inspection. A week later, my mailbox was smashed. The police report said no suspects identified. I wasn't surprised. Grant Hollister, the HOA president, had friends in the local precinct, the kind who made problems disappear. I saw him once, standing on the steps of the clubhouse during one of the construction meetings, grinning like a man who already owned everything he saw. I wondered if he ever felt fear, or if arrogance had burned it out of him. Still, I didn't fight back. Not yet. I kept letting them build, letting their confidence grow unchecked. The deeper they went, the more evidence piled up in my favor. My wife worried I was losing myself to obsession, but I told her this wasn't revenge, it was preparation. The truth doesn't destroy people like this overnight. It waits quietly until the right moment to strike. And that moment was getting closer. One afternoon, I returned home to find a certified letter taped to my door. Notice of property transfer completion. According to the HOA, my land had been fully integrated into the new subdivision. They even listed me as a beneficiary of community expansion. I laughed out loud, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the empty yard. They really believed they'd won. They had no idea that the same paperwork they deforged was now locked in a county evidence file, time-stamped, recorded, and ready to expose them all. That night, I walked to the edge of the construction site. The streetlights glowed dimly over rows of half-finished homes, wooden frames reaching into the night sky like skeletal fingers. I stood there, staring at what they'd built, and whispered to myself, "Keep building." Because every wall they raised, every dollar they spent, would only make the fall harder when it came. But I couldn't have known how far they'd go to protect their lie, or what they'd try next to make me disappear. The weeks that followed blurred together like one long nightmare that refused to end. I stopped counting the days after the construction crews started working through the night, their floodlights washing over my windows until dawn. The noise was relentless, a mechanical heartbeat that never stopped pounding. I tried earplugs, heavy curtains, anything to drown it out. But it wasn't just the sound, it was the message. They wanted me, exhausted, distracted, broken down, enough to give up. The HOA called it necessary progress under deadline. I called it what it was: harassment. Every morning I'd find a new violation notice taped to my front door. Unapproved exterior lighting, improper waste disposal, yard debris accumulation. They fined me for everything they could, even things that didn't exist. Once, they claimed my mailbox leaned half an inch below regulation height. When I measured it, it was perfectly level. That didn't matter. They wanted control, not compliance. I remember one night waking to the sound of voices outside, low and deliberate. I peeked through the blinds and saw 3 men standing by the curb, one of them holding a clipboard with my address written on it. They stayed there for 10 minutes, talking quietly, then left. No truck, no equipment, just silence and tire tracks in the morning. My wife begged me to let it go, to sell the house and leave. But that's what they wanted, to erase the problem rather than face it. I couldn't give them that victory. Instead, I doubled down. I set up cameras, hidden under the eaves, tucked behind the flower bed. I logged every visit, every intrusion, every new stake driven into the ground. And with each passing week, the file grew thicker. What they didn't know was that every nail they hammered, every board they laid on my property, became evidence of trespass. My lawyer, a man named Daniel, agreed to take the case, though he warned me it would take time. They think you're one homeowner against a machine, he said, but machines fall apart when one bolt comes loose. I held on to that. It became my mantra. Still, the HOA wasn't done tightening the screws. They began sending community-wide newsletters filled with subtle digs lines about residents who refused to cooperate, members obstructing progress, individuals damaging the collective reputation of Willow Creek Estates. They never used my name, but everyone knew who they meant. Neighbors stopped waving. Some stopped speaking entirely. A few even began to side with the board, convinced I was selfishly holding back development that would benefit everyone. I watched the community's illusion of unity dissolve into quiet fear. People didn't question authority here. They just obeyed it. And those who didn't became outcasts, like me. Then came the inspection. One morning, 3 HOA board members arrived unannounced, claiming they needed to assess property boundaries to finalize a drainage report. I refused them entry, citing trespass laws. But they pushed past me anyway, walking the yard with clipboards and cameras. When I demanded they leave, Grant Hollister smiled that smug, politician's smile, and said, "If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't mind transparency." I nearly lost it then, but instead, I stood still, memorizing every word, every gesture. Later that night, I wrote it all down, because people like Grant always make the same mistake. They think intimidation will silence you. What it really does is document them. That weekend, I noticed something worse. My property line markers, the ones I'd placed myself years ago, were gone, replaced by new stakes, pushed 5 feet deeper into my yard. It wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. They were rewriting the land in plain sight. I called the county office, only to be told that boundary adjustments had already been filed. When I asked by whom, the clerk hesitated, then said, by the Willow Creek HOA, under community authorization. I hung up before my anger got the best of me. I walked outside that night, the air thick and still, and stared at the half-built homes glowing under construction lights, 95 of them, each one a monument to their arrogance. I wondered if they ever thought about the ground they were standing on, or the man they had stolen it from. I wondered if they ever felt the tremor of guilt beneath their feet. Probably not. People like that don't feel guilt until it's far too late. But something shifted in me that night. I wasn't scared anymore. The fear had burned away, replaced by a cold, steady calm. I started preparing. I gathered every document, every photo, every time-stamped report. Daniels helped me file a quiet motion in county court to freeze any further construction until ownership could be verified. The HOA wasn't notified immediately. It would take a few days before the summons reached them. I knew those days would be dangerous. And I was right. The morning after the court filing, I woke to find my car vandalized. Tires slashed, windshield cracked, spray paint smeared across the hood. Move out. I stood there, staring at the damage, feeling the rage pulse through me. My wife cried, but I didn't. I just took pictures, logged the incident, added it to the file. Because now, it wasn't about winning. It was about exposing. Later that week, during another board meeting, Grant stood before the community and proudly announced that Phase 2 construction was ahead of schedule, and that property ownership had been legally consolidated. The room erupted in applause. I was there, sitting quietly in the back. I didn't say a word. I just watched him bask in his own confidence. He had no idea that, as he spoke, A court clerk was stamping the injunction paperwork that would halt every single project under his name. 2 days later, a county sheriff walked into the HOA office with the official notice. Construction ceased within the hour. I saw the workers pack up, confused, whispering to each other. The site fell silent for the first time in months. That evening, Grant showed up at my house. No warning, no appointment. He stood on my porch, smiling thinly, pretending civility. "We need to talk," he said. I didn't invite him in. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You don't understand what you've started. This is bigger than you." I met his gaze and said, "That's exactly why it's going to end." He left without another word. For days afterward, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Some said I'd sued the HOA for millions. Others said I was being forced out. The truth was stranger than either. I wasn't after money or revenge. I was after recognition, the simple acknowledgement that they'd built their empire on stolen ground. I knew the legal fight would drag on, that they'd use every trick to stall, deflect, and intimidate. But time was finally on my side. They'd poured too much concrete, spent too many millions, to back out quietly. Every passing day, every delay, cost them more. And as the pressure mounted, their unity began to crack. Whispers of blame spread among board members. I heard that one had resigned, another had leaked emails to the press. The local paper called it an internal administrative dispute. I called it justice, beginning to take root. Still I stayed cautious. These people had too much to lose, and desperate men do desperate things. The night before the first court hearing, I heard a knock at my door just after midnight. I hesitated, then opened it to find no one there, only an envelope lying on the mat. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words printed in bold type: "You won, T-win, give up." No signature, no address, just silence outside, heavy and watching. I closed the door, locked it, and went back to my desk. I pinned that note above my monitor as a reminder. Fear was the only weapon they had left, and it no longer worked on me. The next morning, as I stood outside the courthouse, I realized something that chilled me more than anger ever could. They'd underestimated me from the beginning, not because I was smarter or stronger, but because they never believed someone ordinary could hold them accountable. They thought silence was surrender. But silence, in the right hands, is strategy. And mine was about to end, because by the time the judge read the deed into record, the entire facade of Willow Creek Estates would start to crumble, and the people who thought they could bury the truth beneath concrete were about to find out what happens when the ground itself turns against them. The morning of the hearing felt like standing at the edge of a storm AD watched gather for months. The courthouse loomed grey against the overcast sky, its steps slick with rain, every drop echoing the weight of what was about to unfold. I arrived early, dressed in the same suit I'd worn when I first signed the deed to my lander, reminder of where this all began. My lawyer, Daniels, met me at the entrance. He was calm, as ever, his briefcase clutched like a weapon. "They'll come in confident," he said quietly. "So let them. The higher they stand, the harder they fall." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a strange energy. Reporters, community members, even a few neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact, now sitting on the benches. Curiosity painted across their faces. The HOA board sat together near the front, lined in suits and smug composure. Grant Hollister was in the center, his posture straight, his smile rehearsed. When his eyes met mine, there was no fear, just disdain, the kind that says he still believed this was a nuisance, not the reckoning it was about to become. The judge entered, the room quieted, and the hearing began. Grant's attorney opened with confidence, speaking about community improvement, collective progress, and misunderstandings. He painted me as an obstructionist, a man unwilling to adapt to change. I listened silently, every word like a shovel digging deeper into the hole. They didn't realize they'd made. Then it was Daniels's turn. He rose slowly, the quiet in the room, thick as he began. "Your Honor, this isn't a dispute over grass height or fencing regulations. This is a case of land theft planned, executed, and concealed under the guise of community development." He approached the bench, setting down a stack of documents so heavy it landed with a thud. "Every home built on that land sits on a foundation of forgery. The courtroom rippled with whispers. Grant shifted in his seat. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. Daniels continued, his voice measured but sharp. The HOA filed a forged land integration agreement containing my client's signature. We have the original deed, recorded and notarized, proving ownership never changed hands. And we have handwriting analysis confirming the signature on their document is falsified. He lifted a paper from the pile, holding it high. But that's not all. We also have internal HOA emails obtained through discovery, showing explicit knowledge that the land was never theirs. They built anyway. He paused, letting the words sink in. This wasn't negligence. It was deliberate. The silence that followed was suffocating. Grant's attorney tried to interject, objecting to character implications, but the judge overruled him. Daniels wasn't finished. Your Honor, we also present financial records indicating that the HOA board approved construction loans using that fraudulent document as collateral. They borrowed millions on land that never belonged to them. Gasps spread through the courtroom. Reporters' pens scratched furiously across paper. Grant's composure cracked for the first time, just a twitch at the corner of his jaw, but I saw it. I sat still, my heart pounding but steady. This was it. Every sleepless night, every threat, every letter, they all lead here. The judge motioned for the evidence to be entered into record. As the clerk processed the files, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Then the judge spoke. Mr. Hollister, he said, turning his gaze to Grant, would you care to respond to these allegations? Grant stood, adjusting his tie, his voice tight but controlled. Your Honor, the HOA acted in good faith. We followed proper channels. If mistakes were made, they were administrative, not malicious. He glanced toward me, eyes narrowing. This man has been combative from the start, refusing cooperation and spreading misinformation to undermine the community. The words rolled off him like oil, smooth and slippery. But the judge wasn't buying it. Do you deny that this signature was falsified? Grant hesitated, glancing at his lawyer, who subtly shook his head. I'm not a handwriting expert, he said finally. Daniels stepped forward. You don't need to be, Mr. Hollister. You only need to explain why your name appears approving a project that your own documents show required the property owner's consent. He turned to the projector screen as a series of slides appeared, timestamps, emails, signatures. One by one, the truth unfolded under fluorescent light. The judge leaned back, expression unreadable. The room was silent, except for the sound of shuffling papers and shallow breathing. When Daniels finished, he placed the final photo on the screen, a shot of the construction site. The home's nearly complete, and the deed overlaid in bold letters, owned by redacted for privacy. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Hollister, this is serious. The evidence suggests your organization not only trespassed but profited from property that wasn't theirs. Do you have anything else to say? Grant's confidence finally broke. We didn't know. He blurted, we were told the paperwork was verified. Daniels raised an eyebrow. By whom? Grant froze. His lawyer tried to intervene, but the damage was done. The unraveling had begun. The judge called for a recess, but the tension didn't fade. Reporters rushed outside, cameras flashing. I stayed seated, breathing slow, feeling the weight lift piece by piece. The moment I had waited for wasn't joy, it was vindication, quiet and heavy. When the session resumed, the judge addressed the court with finality. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds probable cause for fraudulent misrepresentation, trespass, and unauthorized use of private property. Effective immediately, all construction and sales activities within the disputed area are suspended pending further investigation. Gasps filled the room again. Grant sank into his seat, pale and sweating. I looked at him not with anger anymore, but with something colder. Pity maybe, because I knew what was coming next. Daniels handed the judge one last document. Your Honor, there's one more exhibit. A recorded conversation between HOA board members discussing how to handle the homeowner problem. He pressed play. The speakers crackled, then voices filled the room, Grant's among them. Don't worry about the deed, one voice said. Once it's built, he won't be able to fight it. The county will side with us. Laughter followed. Another voice added, he can't afford to drag this out in court. The laughter stopped abruptly as the recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. The judge's gavel came down once, sharp and final. This case will proceed to full investigation under fraud statutes. Mr. Hollister, you and your board are hereby ordered to provide full financial disclosures within 10 business days. Grant didn't look up. His hands trembled as he gathered his papers. The sound of his world collapsing, echoing louder than any verdict. Reporters swarmed as the session ended. Cameras flashing, voices shouting, "Did you really forge the deed, Mr. Hollister? How long have you known about the fraud? Will the homeowners be compensated?" He didn't answer any of them. He just walked out, his confidence stripped bare. I followed. Moments later, the courthouse steps, slick with rain again. But this time the sky felt lighter, the air cleaner. The same reporters turned their lenses toward me now. "Sir, how does it feel to win?" one asked. I paused. "It's not about winning," I said quietly. "It's about reminding them that no one, no matter how powerful, stands above the truth." The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat before the flurry of cameras resumed. Daniels joined me outside, his voice low. "They'll appeal. It'll take time." I nodded. "Let them. Time is something they can't rebuild." As we walked away, I glanced back at the courthouse. For the first time in months, I felt peace creeping in around the edges of my anger. The land they tried to steal was still scarred, the homes still standing like monuments to arrogance, but now everyone knew. The story would spread, the headlines would run, and the foundation they'd poured over my name would crumble beneath the weight of their lies. That night, I returned to my property. The construction lights were dark, the machinery still. Rain puddled in the half-finished streets, reflecting the emptiness of what they'd tried to create. I walked to the old oak stump, the place where it all began. Nant knelt down, pressing my hand to the wet soil. It was quiet, peaceful, almost sacred again. Behind me, the skeletal frames of 95 homes stood silent, waiting for a future they'd never have. And for the first time, I let myself breathe. But even then, as the wind rustled through the trees, I couldn't shake one thought. Power doesn't die easily. It hides, it waits, it rebuilds. And I knew, deep down, that somewhere behind closed doors, Grant Hollister and his board were already plotting their next move. They'd lost this battle, but they hadn't accepted defeat. Not yet. The question now wasn't whether I'd stop them again. It was how far they'd go to take back what never belonged to them in the first place. And as I stood there under the fading rain, I made a silent promise. Whatever came next, I'd be ready. Because when you fight for what's yours, the real war doesn't end in court. It begins the moment the gavel falls. When the gavel fell that final day, I thought it was over. I thought the storm had passed, that I could finally stand on my land without the weight of someone else's greed pressing into the soil beneath my feet. But endings aren't clean. They don't come wrapped in justice or applause. They come slowly, in quiet shifts, the kind you don't notice until you realize the world around you has changed. The weeks after the hearing were a blur of silence and shock. The HOA office was locked within days. Their glossy signs that once shimmered with pride now hung crooked in the rain, letters peeling, the words community first fading into irony. The board resigned one by one, some claiming ignorance, others fleeing accountability altogether. Grant Hollister vanished from public view, his name whispered like a ghost at community meetings. Rumor sa iti moved to states over, started something new under a different name. But I knew the kind of guilt that doesn't move with you, it lingers. The county eventually took over the development site. Inspectors roamed the half-built streets, clipboards in hand, shaking their heads at the violations buried beneath the foundation. It was as if every inch of concrete they poured carried the weight of deceit. And now it was all cracking under the truth. I stood by as they fenced it off, a rusted chain link wrapped around the land they once claimed was theirs. Seeing those signs, no trespassing under investigation, felt poetic. The same words they'd once thrown at me now guarded my soil from them. I didn't celebrate. I just watched, quietly, because victory doesn't roar. It breathes. Slowly, cautiously, like something afraid it might disappear. Within months, news spread wider than I ever expected. Local outlets turned it into a headline. National papers called it the HOA heist that backfired. I didn't give interviews at first. I didn't want fame. I wanted normalcy, to live without looking over my shoulder or checking every letter that came in the mail. But the story refused to die. It caught fire. Online people angry, vindicated, others sharing their own HOA horror stories. My inbox filled with messages from strangers thanking me for fighting back. Some were emotional families who'd lost homes, retirees who'd been bullied by board members, veterans fined for flying their flags. It wasn't just my story anymore, it was everyone's. The HOA system, the unchecked power, the quiet oppression disguised as community order. My case had opened a door that wouldn't close again. Lawsuits followed, other homeowners challenging their boards, demanding transparency. Counties revisited zoning approvals. State legislators proposed new oversight for HOAs. What started as one man's battle for his land became a movement for accountability. But while the world outside shifted, I stayed close to home. My property had changed. The oak tree that once marked its heart was gone, but I planted a new one in its place. It was small, fragile even, but it grew fast. Every morning, I'd walk out with coffee and watch the light hit its leaves. I do remember the days when that land felt like a battlefield and feel the strange peace that comes after survival. Sometimes, though I'd walk along the edge of the abandoned construction site, the skeletons of those 95 homes still stood, empty windows, staring out like hollow eyes. Nature was taking them back. Vines crawling over cracked driveways, birds nesting in open frames. It was hauntingly beautiful. A monument to arrogance undone by truth. The developers tried to sell the homes, but no one wanted them. The land title disputes made them toxic, unsellable. The banks foreclosed, the investors vanished, and my land sat untouched. Eventually, the county reached out. They offered a settlement, restitution for the damages and losses. It wasn't about the money anymore, but I accepted, not for greed, for closure. With that settlement, I rebuilt what I'd lost. A new home, modest but mine, stood where the first had been. I built it quietly, without permits tangled in corruption, without neighbors watching like vultures. Just me, the soil, and the sound of wind moving through the trees. Daniels visited once, standing in the open yard, smiling faintly. "You really did it," he said. I laughed softly. "No," I told him. "We did it." He looked out at the ruins beyond the fence. "You know," he said, "this case will be studied for years." Maybe he was right. Maybe somewhere in a law class, my name would be cited under property rights and fraudulent development. But for me, it wasn't about precedent. It was about principle. The HOA had tried to erase ownership, identity, agency. And in fighting back, it reminded them of something they'd forgotten. Power belongs to those who protect it, not those who exploit it. Months turned into a year. The site was finally cleared. The county decided to convert the abandoned land into a public greenbelt park for the community. They asked for my blessing, and I gave it. But I made one request: that they name it Oak's Rest, after the tree that once stood as witness to it all. On the day they unveiled the plaque, families gathered. Children ran laughing through the grass, and for the first time in a long time, the air felt whole again. Standing there, I realized the irony. This land, once stolen in the name of community, had finally become something truly shared. Not owned, not controlled, but lived in harmony. Still, not everyone found peace. Grant Hollister faced multiple lawsuits. The state attorney general opened an investigation into fraudulent HOA practices. His assets froze. His reputation collapsed. Last I heard, he was working consulting jobs under another name, avoiding cameras and questions. Sometimes I'd see his face on the news, older, worn, eyes hollow, and I'd wonder if he ever thought it was worth it. The lies, the greed, the empire of control he built on top of someone else's ground. Maybe he told himself he was doing it for order, for the greater good. Maybe he believed it. But control built on deceit never lasts. It cracks, it crumbles, it eats itself alive. I didn't need revenge anymore. The world had given him his. One evening, I returned to the park alone. The sun was low, the sky streaked gold, and the wind moved gently through the young oak's branches. I stood there, hands in my pockets, listening to the laughter in the distance. It hit me then, not the victory, but the cost. Years of stress, sleepless nights, moments stolen by fear. You don't come out of something like that the same. You just learn to live with the echo. And yet, I'd do it again. Because some things learn truth. Dignity are worth every fight. Before I left that day, I placed a small stone beneath the oak, carved with one word: proof. Not proof of ownership, or of victory, but proof that no matter how far corruption spreads, the truth has a way of finding daylight. In the months that followed, life became simple again. I worked the land, grew a small garden, built a fence, not to keep people out, but to mark what was mine with honesty. Neighbors, old and new, stopped by sometimes. They'd heard the story. Some were cautious, others admiring. A few still whispered about how one man took down an entire HOA. But I never corrected them, because it wasn't about taking anyone down. It was about standing up. One night, while watching the sunset over the rebuilt field, I thought about how easily people give away control, how homeowners sign contracts without reading the fine print, how boards rise quietly until they believe they're untouchable. Power creeps in through apathy, and it stays because no one says no. That's how it starts. One unchecked rule, one ignored voice, one "it's just policy." Until suddenly, the land beneath you belongs to someone else. And so, I made a vow to keep telling my story, not out of pride, but as a warning. Because every neighborhood has its quiet tyrants. Every HOA boardroom holds someone who believes authority is ownership. And every homeowner deserves to know that the paper trail matters, that a signature can be both weapon and shield. Years later, a journalist reached out, wanting to write a book about the case. I declined. I didn't want to relive it. But before she hung up, she asked, "If you could say one thing to people watching, what would it be?" I thought for a moment, then answered, "Don't let silence sign for you." She didn't say anything after that, just wrote it down. Maybe that was enough. Maybe those words would outlive me, travel farther than the story itself. The land is quiet now. The park thrives. The oak stands tall. And at night, the stars return where once there were floodlights. Sometimes, when I walk its edge, I hear echoes the hum of construction, the shouts of foremen, the voice of Grant, arguing that progress demands sacrifice. But they fade, replaced by wind and the faint laughter of families. That's what justice sounds like. Not applause, but peace. As I watch the sunset spill over the horizon, painting gold across the grass that was once a battlefield, I finally understand the true cost of ownership. It's not money, not status, it's the willingness to stand alone when the crowd calls you crazy. It's knowing that sometimes the only thing separating right from ruin is a single piece of paper and the courage to defend it. The HOA took my land for 95 homes. I let them finish. Let them believe they'd won. And then I pulled the deed out in court, not to destroy them, but to remind them that truth, no matter how buried, will always find its way back to the surface. That's the lesson they never learned. And as long